The developments about Labour's proposal to impose VAT on private school fees have sparked controversy, with a High Court legal challenge now in motion that was to be expected. The policy, set to take effect in January, is positioned as a tax reform aimed at addressing educational inequality, yet it has generated considerable backlash. I'll try and look at the reasons for and against this policy, contextualise the latest legal challenge, and offer a critical reflection. Labour's VAT on private schools stems from its broader agendum to reduce educational disparity between the state and the private sector, and to improve the state sector. According to Labour's rationale, private schools enjoy a fair and unfair advantage by being exempt from VAT, a privilege they argue reinforces elitism and widens the gap in educational opportunities. There is no VAT levied on any other form of education in Britain. By levying VAT, Labour expects to generate substantial tax revenue, which could be reinvested into state schools, improving resources and overall quality. And this, the party suggests, would foster greater equality in the education system, redistributing wealth and opportunity from the affluent to the underfunded state sector. Additionally, the VAT policy is grounded in the principle of fairness, ensuring that all sectors contribute proportionately to public services. As private schools largely serve wealthier families, proponents argue that it's only right that such institutions pay their fair share of tax, because they are defined as businesses rather than schools, especially given that many state schools are struggling with funding costs and are struggling with the need to rebuild following the concrete scandal. Of course, people who are sending their children to private schools have already paid tax to fund the state system, so they're effectively paying for their schooling twice. And however, this policy has been drawn up, and of course the initial policy, which Angela Rayner was very keen on a few years ago, was to abolish private schools entirely. So one could argue they're getting off lightly. But the policy has drawn, nevertheless, fierce criticism, particularly concerning its impact on special education, the SEND children, faith-based schooling and military families. As highlighted in the Daily Telegraph, the most pressing concern revolves around the disproportionate effect that VAT will have on poorer children, particularly those with an SEND background. Currently, fewer than 8,000 of the 111,000 SEND children in private education have an education and health care plan, an EHCP, meaning that the majority would not be exempt from VAT. And the imposition of this tax could force parents to withdraw their children from private institutions due to the unaffordable fees, leaving SEND children vulnerable as the state sector is seen as under-resourced and ill-prepared to accommodate their specialised needs. Paul Conrath, the senior solicitor leading the legal challenge, argues that this policy violates human rights law, specifically Article 2 of Protocol 1 of the European Convention on Human Rights, and this article guarantees the right to education without discrimination, and Conrath contends that the VAT would effectively hinder many SEND children from accessing appropriate educational environments. Furthermore, the critics claim that Labour's exemption framework, based on EHCPs, is deeply flawed. The bureaucratic delays, as noted by Bridget Phillipson, Labour's own Education Secretary, mean that the EHCP process can take up to 2 years, leaving many families in a precarious situation. With councils unable to process requests in a timely manner, children may lose access to crucial educational services during this transition period. The legal challenge, led by Sinclair's Law, signals the first official test to Labour's VAT policy, with more challenges likely to follow in the next few months, leaving those from military families and faith schools also to get involved in legal challenges. And the crux of the legal cases will centre on whether the government can justify this hindrance to education as rational, necessary and proportionate under the European Convention on Human Rights. So effectively, can Labour justify the probable threat that poorer children will have to quit their current education and go to other schools in the middle of a school year, literally in the middle of a school year, because of the sudden knee-jerk imposition of a 20% hike in tax? The letter sent to the Treasury argues that such justification is lacking, particularly given the state's already overstretched SEND provisions. While the government has yet to comment on this ongoing legal case, the implications are far-reaching. Should the High Court rule against Labour, it would deal a significant blow to the party's educational reform agenda and raise questions about its ability to implement major fiscal policy changes based on that. On the other hand, if the challenge is unsuccessful, Labour will have the opportunity to proceed with a policy they believe could transform the educational landscape. My own hunch is that this policy, whether it is judged to be thoroughly legal or not, is not likely to improve the education of ordinary children in state schools to any degree at all. At the moment, it's funding, or the government is suggesting that it's going to fund a drive to recruit new teachers. So, in other words, it's going to pay for advertising. This is absurd, utterly absurd. I think the crisis itself and the story may well encourage new teachers to sign up to teacher training courses, and even better, to sign up to teacher training courses that are sandwiched into specific schools. But those schools are badly stretched, and the resources to have teacher mentors to oversee new teachers simply don't exist. I've spent a lot of time not only teaching in Britain, but teaching abroad, I think I've now taught at every single level. And for a while I was teaching teachers how to teach, and I've also taught in private as well as state schools, and for quite a period I worked as a supply teacher. I like to keep busy, and I like to continue working and to match the sort of what do you call it, business with the arts with real teaching. So whether it's YouTube or animation, I also like to be teaching at the same time, and I've pretty well done that all my life. And if I'm not teaching in a school, then I'm doing some tutoring, or I'm teaching literally for a charity, or for charity. And I believe good education is a way to bridge social and cultural divides. And I believe it's a bigger bridge than money. I also don't believe in this so-called the proffered old boys network. I was privileged enough to go to a private school. What I didn't know at the time was my fees were completely paid by the school. I was on a full bursary because my family was in difficulties. I had no idea until my mother's funeral, when I was told. And I thought that was an extraordinary demonstration of the level of charity that justifies the charitable status of the school itself. And I've since then gone back to the school and done speeches and bits and pieces. I think I've even taught some lessons as a sort of thank you to the school for its kindness. The school was not without its problems, and I certainly wasn't wasn't given significant academic advantages. In fact, I was misstreamed for a lot of the time, which was very frustrating. And I think I would have been better off in a grammar school. And I came from a part of the country that still had grammar schools, and a very good grammar school almost next door to where we used to live. I think the grammar school system is a remarkably good system. And while I think that with modern technology, a more comprehensive class structure is possible, and we could probably finally realize the ideal of comprehensive education, it requires a change in teaching methodology. And without that change, we're just going to trundle along with the same obsession that teachers have in dumbing down, teaching to the middle rank, rather than helping the very poor, the very bad, the very the very needy, rather than appealing to the very gifted. We target that sort of middle bracket, and more than that, as a teacher trainer, I would regularly talk about the silent majority, the noddies in the class, who think they're not noticed and who never put up their hands. Part of that silent majority that need to be targeted. Well, with modern technology, we should be able to run two or three different, not only two or three different levels of education in the same class, but probably two or three different subjects in the same class. But we need to re-energize our mission as teachers. We need to remember that our first job is to inspire. Our second job is to guide. Quite low down the list is to mark. I think if a child produces work, then we should be marking. But there is a tyranny of competitive marking, and it's not always appropriate. At least, certainly for the higher level, the higher achievers, it's something people need to get used to. But it's not always beneficial, and we need to find different ways of monitoring and guiding what children and students are producing, and making sure that they are doing their best. There is only one educational ambition, and that is excellence. And anything less than that is failure. Excellence, personal excellence, and the best that is possible. And looking for trying to get the entire class to achieve the same, trying to achieve parity is not education. That is cattle farming, and that is factory producing, and that is in line with the Model Ford systems that have been constraining education since the end of the 19th century. We need to think of a new way forward that will help, for example, SEND children, that will help high achievers, and that will bridge these gaps and will also give children the opportunity to study the subjects that they want to study. The idea that subjects are ranked in terms of utility is old school. Subjects are ranked in terms of interest, and to teach a subject that a child is interested in and to get a child to look academically at that subject is just as valuable. And the subject is a door to a world of education, to a world of thinking deeply about a topic and thinking about that topic within context and critically evaluating that topic and learning the skills to talk about and to discuss that topic, whether that is needlework, history, physics, maths, or fishing. Doesn't really matter. And there's an arrogance about the ranking of subjects, and with maths and physics and the sciences often seen as some sort of core STEM subjects. There really is no STEM subject. The STEM subject is the student who is trying to achieve a standard of excellence, a standard of insight, to learn the way of manipulating information. So the VAT policy may be a well-intentioned, but it's a myopic approach to solving educational inequality. And while the goal of generating funds for state schools is admirable and necessary, the failure to adequately address the complex needs of SEND children and the bureaucratic inefficiencies surrounding EHCPs, for example, highlights a disconnect between policy ambition and practical reality. And the destruction or the targeting of one group in the hope that another group will benefit is absurd. Our aim should be to improve everything. And the discussion about private education is tinged with a discussion about class, which is which I think is a little bit of a nonsense discussion anyway, and we'll get to that at a later stage. I'm not convinced that we have a big issue of class in the modern 20th century in Britain. I think it still exists, and it should still be crushed, or it should still be changed, but it's not as significant as some people who are arguing for this VAT thing suggest. A lot of the people who go to private schools are certainly not privileged, and certainly don't come from a privileged class-based system. They are responding to a need and an inadequacy in their own school background. So we know there are failing schools, and the only way to avoid those is to move house. Some people simply cannot move house. And some people have bought into better education by moving house. Not so dissimilar to paying school fees. And there's the targeting of private schools for additional taxation is quite different from targeting schools for on the basis of class, on the basis of some sort of social reconstruction. And the present policy is going to risk creating greater social division, as the policy is seen as punitive rather than reformative. So the forthcoming legal battles encapsulate the ongoing tension between equity and practical governance, and Labour's VAT raid on private schools, while ideologically aligned with fairness, using the language of fairness, faces now a formidable challenge, not just from a legal standpoint, but from the practical consequences and the ethical implications that this policy may have on some of the most vulnerable children in our society.